Title Lash, they blocked his rank. He broke the system. Part 1. The Glass Ceiling. Chapter Short 1. Captain David West. Captain David West stood at attention, shoulders squared, his polished boots reflecting the sterile lights of Fort Radley's command center. The brass insignia on his crisp dress uniform gleamed proudly, the ribbons lined in immaculate order across his chest. He was a model soldier, disciplined, brilliant, and beloved by his unit. A 10-year veteran with multiple overseas deployments, David had led men through war zones and humanitarian crises alike. But today wasn't about the battlefield. Today was about his future. "At ease, Captain," said Colonel Simmons, his voice flat, clipped. He didn't look up from the folder in front of him. A second passed before David relaxed his stance. The room was cold, not just from the air conditioning, but from the tension in the air. The only sound was the soft flip of papers and the hum of fluorescent lights. "I reviewed your promotion file," Simmons finally said. He closed the folder gently, resting his palms on it like a final judgment. "You're not being moved forward to Major." David blinked. "Just like that?" "I don't understand, sir," David replied. His voice was calm, but his stomach dropped. "My evaluations were exemplary. I've met every qualification, passed the command assessments, and it's not about your paperwork." Simmons looked up finally, his gray eyes cold and impersonal. "It's about fit, command presence. The higher-ups felt you weren't suitable for promotion at this time." David inhaled sharply, jaw tightening. "Sir, with respect, I'd like to request clarification. Fit is subjective. My team's performance, my leadership metrics, my combat evaluations, they all reflect my readiness." Simmons leaned back in his chair. "Captain, this isn't a debate." David held his ground. "Is this about my record or something else?" There it was, a brief flicker in Simmons' eyes. Not fear, but the discomfort of a man who'd hoped the conversation wouldn't go that far. "There's no conspiracy here," the colonel said. "Some officers make it, some don't." David walked out with a storm brewing behind his measured footsteps. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Hallway. The whispers started the same day. "Did you hear? West got passed over." "No way, that guy carried the whole 82nd unit in Kandahar." "Yeah, but you know how this place works? You gotta look the part." That last comment cut deeper than any bullet David had ever dodged. Look the part. As if his uniform didn't look the same, as if his medals weren't real, as if his leadership was invisible behind the color of his skin. David sat alone in the officer's mess, barely touching his tray. Across the room, 2 junior officers glanced at him and quickly looked away when he met their eyes. He wasn't paranoid. He was observant, like he'd been trained to be. Lieutenant Jamie Tran slid into the seat across from him. She was young, sharp, and respected him like a mentor. Her expression was tight with anger. "This is BS," she muttered under her breath. "You should have been promoted 2 years ago. Now they're just stalling, and we both know why." David kept his voice low. "Careful, Jamie. That kind of talk can land you in hot water." "Then let it boil," she shot back. "You trained half the leadership in this division. Simmons wouldn't last a week on the ground like you did, and he knows it." David appreciated her loyalty, but that wasn't going to change the fact that he'd been stonewalled. Again, quietly. Like so many other times he'd brushed off the casual slights and subtle roadblocks. It was always, "You're so articulate, West," or "I didn't expect someone like you to lead that clean op in Syria." Compliments wrapped in coded language. Now it was a full stop, no more climbing, a silent ceiling. Back in his quarters that night, David opened his laptop and pulled up Army Regulation 620, the chain of command and grievance protocols. He wasn't ready to let this slide. Part 2. The pushback begins. Chapter 3. Filing the complaint. Captain David West sat in his office. The Army's Equal Opportunity pamphlet spread across his desk. Every word on the page felt loaded. Discrimination, retaliation, lack of advancement opportunities. He'd heard the phrases before, but reading them now, knowing they applied to him, hit differently. He took a deep breath, then typed out his formal grievance. 2. Department of the Army Inspector General subject. Discriminatory denial of promotion. Captain David West. I am filing an official complaint regarding discriminatory practices in the evaluation and promotion process for my recent candidacy for the rank of major. Despite exemplary service, deployment history, and consistent top-tier evaluations, I was denied advancement based on a subjective assessment of not suitable without objective reasoning provided. He detailed the facts. He attached evaluations, commendations, letters from subordinates, and mission reports. Everything was meticulously organized. Once he hit send, there was no going back. That night, he told his wife, Alicia, "I knew something like this would happen," she said softly, brushing her hand against his. "But I'm proud of you. They picked the wrong man to push down." "I just wanted to serve," David said, voice low. "I didn't want to become a case study." "You're not a case," Alicia replied. "You're a spark." Chapter 4. The chain reacts. 2 weeks passed. Then came the knock. "Captain West," barked a voice at his door. It was Colonel Simmons, flanked by 2 other officers from command. David stood. "Sir, you're to report to Fort Meacham tomorrow. Inspector General's office wants an in-person review. Pack your bags." Just like that. On the flight over, David wore his uniform like armor. People stared, some nodded respectfully, others avoided eye contact. He knew what they saw. A strong black officer, clean-cut, decorated, focused. But beneath that was a man carrying decades of systemic bias on his shoulders. The Inspector General's office was quiet but tense. A review board of 3 colonels and 1 civilian advisor sat across from him. They asked questions with cold detachment. "Were you ever reprimanded during deployment? Can you describe the leadership gaps mentioned by your commanding officer? Were there any behavioral concerns brought up by superiors?" David answered calmly, factually. "No reprimands, no concerns. My record is clean." He produced evaluations, glowing reports from war zones, notes of commendation, unit morale stats, even anonymous soldier feedback. One reviewer actually raised an eyebrow in surprise. Then came the moment he'd prepared for. "I'd like to submit a comparison," David said, handing them a file. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Bradford's file, the officer who was promoted in my place. He failed a physical in 2022 and was cited for poor team cohesion during his tour in Ramadi. Yet he was advanced." There was a long silence in the room. When the civilian finally spoke, her voice was even. "Captain West, your record is, frankly, outstanding. We will conduct a deeper review. But thank you for your courage in bringing this forward." David stood and saluted. "Yes, ma'am." Outside the office, he finally exhaled. A tiny part of him felt something he hadn't in weeks. Hope. But the backlash was coming. Back at Fort Radley, rumors swirled. He went over Simmons' head. West pulling the race card now? Why couldn't he just let it go? Even some fellow black officers kept their distance. Fearful, nervous. Because they knew. Whistleblowers rarely had happy endings in the military. But David wasn't just doing it for himself. He was doing it for every soldier who'd been quietly passed over, every voice ignored, every dream stalled because of bias disguised as command culture. This wasn't just about one promotion. This was about all the doors that had been slammed shut, and now maybe one that might finally open. Part 3. Retaliation and Resolve. Chapter 5. Cold Shoulders. When Captain West returned to Fort Radley, it wasn't the same. The atmosphere in the command hall had shifted. Conversations paused when he walked in. Jokes stopped mid-sentence. The camaraderie that once surrounded him felt colder now, like a frost had crept into the walls. He wasn't naive. He knew what this was, retaliation by silence. His inbox was suddenly flooded with tedious administrative tasks. Data reports, equipment audits, desk reviews. None of them were aligned with his role or rank. It was as if someone wanted to sideline him, bury him under paperwork until he broke. At lunch, he sat alone. Even Lieutenant Tran, his most loyal supporter, hesitated before joining him. "You okay?" she asked cautiously. David nodded. "They want me to quit, make it look like I'm not a team player." Jamie's eyes darted to the table across the room where Simmons sat. "There's talk going around that you're making the Army look bad." David's voice was low and firm. "I'm not making the Army look bad. I'm making the truth visible." Later that week, he received a formal counseling statement for insubordination, based on an interaction where he'd allegedly failed to respectfully respond to a superior officer during a routine supply briefing. It was nonsense, fabricated. He filed a rebuttal, calmly, professionally. Every move was documented. He knew retaliation was predictable and illegal, but what they didn't count on was how organized, unshakable, and unafraid he was. Chapter 6. The Media Leak. 2 weeks later it happened. David woke to a buzzing phone. Dozens of texts. Yo, bro, you're on the news. You didn't tell me you were fighting the system like this. Respect. CNN just ran a segment about a decorated black officer passed over for promotion. Was that you? He clicked the link. Army officer denied promotion, sparks discrimination investigation. The article detailed how a highly decorated black captain had filed a formal complaint with the Inspector General, challenging a promotion system that critics called opaque and inherently biased. His name was not used, but the details were unmistakably about him. Photos from previous deployments were embedded in the story. One showed him carrying a wounded soldier over his shoulder during a mission in Syria. Another was a smiling shot of his unit returning from Afghanistan. His heart raced. He hadn't spoken to the press. Someone else had leaked it, maybe from the IG's office, maybe someone on base. He had no idea. By mid-morning, his name was trending on Twitter. Chaka Captain West, Jacher Promote West, Jachen Black Excellence in Uniform. The calls began shortly after. Local journalists, activists, veterans groups, even a retired general left a voicemail. Captain West, I saw the article. I've read your file before. You briefed me once in Kabul. I'll be reaching out to the Department of the Army directly. This isn't over. Support poured in from all directions. Strangers, former comrades, community leaders. But so did the hate. Trolls flooded the comment sections. Accusations of playing the victim. Affirmative action jokes, racist memes, veiled threats. Command was furious. Simmons called him in. Did you leak this story? No, sir, David answered calmly. But I stand by everything I've filed, and the public deserves to know the truth. Simmons was seething. You've embarrassed this base. The Army doesn't need activists in uniform. David looked him square in the eye. The Army needs justice. Sir, the fire had been lit, and it wasn't going out anytime soon. Part 4, Cracks in the Armor. Chapter 7, The Witness. The moment came on a Tuesday afternoon. Quiet, unassuming. Captain West was reviewing training reports when his phone buzzed. It was Lieutenant Colonel Marcia Whitaker, retired, former operations lead from David's early tours in Iraq. David, her voice came steady but urgent. I saw the news. I need to speak with the Inspector General. I've seen this kind of thing before. This exact kind of thing, and I have documentation. David froze. You're serious? I was on the selection board that first flagged you for fast-track promotion back in 2021. Your name mysteriously disappeared off the shortlist before the meeting even ended. I filed an internal note. No one responded. David's heart pounded. Marcia wasn't just anyone. She was respected across the ranks and had a reputation for integrity. Her testimony alone could swing everything. Within hours, she was connected to the IG team, agreeing to give a sworn deposition. She even forwarded old internal emails that showed subtle manipulation of shortlists, specifically omitting David's name and replacing it with less qualified candidates. This was no longer just about him. It was about a pattern. Chapter 8. The investigation expands. The Inspector General's office responded swiftly. They reopened the internal review, not just for David's file, but for all officer promotions at Fort Radley over the last 5 years. A task force was formed. External military ethics advisors were brought in. Congressional oversight was quietly informed. Simmons and his inner circle panicked. Suddenly, emails were being scrubbed. Meetings happened behind closed doors. Officers who once mocked David were now avoiding eye contact entirely. But the pressure only grew. Veterans organizations started releasing statements in support of David. Retired generals and civil rights attorneys appeared on national news discussing systemic bias in military advancement. Even members of Congress tweeted, If a soldier like Captain David West isn't fit for promotion, then something is broken in our system. Meanwhile, David stayed focused. He showed up to duty. He trained his unit. He submitted reports, on time, without drama. He never raised his voice. He never snapped back. He let the truth do the talking. The system was watching now. Part 5. The Tipping Point. Chapter 9. The Secret Recording. 3 weeks into the reopened investigation, something explosive dropped. A former junior officer, First Lieutenant Kyle Dorsey, approached David privately. "I need to get something off my chest," he whispered. "And I think it's time." Dorsey had been present in a closed-door meeting a year prior, one where Simmons and 2 other senior officers allegedly discussed why David wouldn't be a good look in high-level briefings. The implication had been clear. Race. What no one knew was that Dorsey had accidentally recorded part of the meeting on his phone. He'd never deleted it. Out of fear, he hadn't told anyone. But after seeing David fight so relentlessly and watching the truth finally begin to surface, he was ready. "I'm handing it to the IG directly," Dorsey said, handing over the flash drive. "You deserve that stripe. You earned it 100 times over." The clip was short, just over 90 seconds, but damning. He's sharp, sure. But when we're in front of brass or politicians, we need someone who fits the image, you know. Yeah, optics matter. And you don't want to make waves right now with a statement promotion. The voices were identifiable, clear, recorded with date and timestamp. It was the final crack in the dam. Chapter 10. Fallout. The leak reached the IG, then the Pentagon. Within 48 hours, Colonel Simmons was placed on immediate administrative suspension. His office was sealed. He was escorted from the building under full protocol. 2 other officers were quietly reassigned pending further review. The Army released a public statement. "We are conducting a thorough investigation into allegations of misconduct and racial bias in promotion practices. The United States Army remains committed to fairness, integrity, and equal opportunity for all service members." The press pounced. Disra Promote West trended again, this time with new energy. Even international outlets picked up the story. David became a symbol, not a victim, a warrior. But through it all, he remained calm, grounded, focused. Because it was never about revenge, it was about change. Part 6. Judgment Day. Chapter 11. The board reconvenes. It was a gray morning when David received the call. "Captain West," said the voice on the other end, "you've been summoned to appear before the Special Promotion Review Board. 1 week from today. Pentagon Building, room 312. This was it. Not a hearing, not another internal interview. This was the board, the highest-ranking officers in the Army, tasked with reviewing promotion appeals. Normally, appeals were denied quietly or buried in bureaucracy. But now, under intense public scrutiny, his case was the first in years to be granted a full formal review. David stood in front of the mirror that night in full dress uniform. His medals glinted in the dim light. He looked like a major. He felt like one. But still, the final judgment was out of his hands. Alicia walked in quietly and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "No matter what they say," she whispered, "you already won." Chapter 12. The Testimony. The day arrived. David entered the Pentagon with perfect posture and silent strength. He passed through security, saluted guards, and walked into room 312. Inside sat 6 generals and 1 civilian ethics advisor, the highest levels of military leadership. Across the room, a single empty chair waited for him. He sat, calm, steady, not a trace of bitterness in his voice as he answered their questions. "Yes, sir, I filed the complaint myself." "No, sir, I did not leak to the press." "Yes, ma'am, I believe racial bias played a role." "No, ma'am, I am not seeking revenge, only what is right." They asked about combat, command, ethics, loyalty, race, resilience. He answered every question not just with facts but with dignity. Then came the surprise. The door opened, and in walked Lieutenant Colonel Whitaker, unscheduled, unannounced. She walked straight to the board and handed them a folder. "I served with Captain West for 3 tours," she said. "I've watched soldiers rise because of him, and I've watched this institution let him down repeatedly. If we are truly about honor, integrity, and excellence, then promote this man. He doesn't just deserve it. The Army needs him wearing that oak leaf." Then, another surprise. First Lieutenant Dorsey followed her in, shaking as he approached the board. "I was there," he said, choking on nerves. "I recorded the conversation. I was scared, but I can't be quiet anymore. They said he didn't look the part. Well, this is what the Army should look like." The room was silent, and in that silence, David felt something shift. Clear, Part 7, The Verdict. Chapter 13, Major West. 3 days later, David got the call. He was at the gym, sweat glistening on his brow, trying not to obsess over what came next. His phone rang with a number from Washington. He answered with a clipped, "Captain West." "Not anymore," said the voice. Pause. "You've been promoted, effective immediately. Congratulations, Major David West." David didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds. Then, "Thank you, sir." He hung up, walked outside, and stared up at the blue sky. He didn't cheer. He didn't cry. He just stood there, still, quiet, humbled. Because this wasn't just for him. It was for every soldier who was told they weren't enough. For every whispered comment, every stolen opportunity, every "you don't fit the image." Now he was the image. Chapter 14. A New Mission. The ceremony was small by David's request. He didn't want a spectacle. He didn't want speeches from politicians or fake apologies from command officers who once avoided his gaze. Instead, he asked for something different, to pin his new rank in front of his unit. His soldiers, black, white, Latino, Asian, male, female, straight, queer, stood at full attention in the Fort Radley courtyard. Lieutenant Jamie Tran stepped forward with the silver oak leaf insignia. "I watched him carry soldiers through fire," she said, "and now we carry his legacy with pride." She pinned the leaf on his collar. Applause erupted. David saluted the unit. "You made me better. Now it's my job to make sure no one else gets left behind." Later, as he stood alone by the base flagpole, a young black cadet approached him. "Sir," the cadet said nervously, "I just wanted to say, what you did, it gives me hope." David turned to him and smiled. "Good. Now go earn your bars. And when you do, lift the next one up too." Part 8, Ripple Effect. Chapter 15. The Pentagon Call. 3 weeks after his promotion, David received another call from Washington. This time it was the Undersecretary of the Army herself. "Major West," she said with warmth, "we'd like to fly you in for a leadership roundtable. Quiet meeting, closed door. Just a few key people discussing potential reforms in officer evaluation processes. Your perspective is needed." David was stunned. The same institution that once silenced him was now asking for his insight. Alicia smiled when he told her, "You broke the ceiling, love. Now they want you to help rebuild the roof." David flew to D.C. the following week, entering rooms that once seemed unreachable. Generals, senators, policy experts, all sitting around a table, eyes on him. He spoke clearly and boldly. He talked about objective scoring systems, blind evaluations, mentorship gaps, and subconscious bias in language like command presence or fit. People listened. Notes were taken. What surprised him most was when an older white general leaned forward and said, "You're right. We've been gatekeeping for decades without realizing it. Or maybe without admitting it." The general paused, then added, "That ends now." Chapter 16. The Memo. A month later, the Department of the Army quietly released a new internal memo. Effective immediately, all promotion boards will include one external ethics advisor and adopt blind scoring for leadership evaluations. All officers denied promotion must be provided documented reasoning with measurable criteria. Bias training is mandatory for board members. It wasn't a revolution, but it was a start. News outlets called it the West Reform. David's inbox filled again, this time with messages of gratitude. Young officers wrote from across the country, "I didn't think someone like me had a shot until I heard your story. You gave us a voice, sir. Thank you. I'm staying in the Army because of you." Even Dorsey, now stationed overseas, sent a note. "I finally feel proud of doing the right thing. You helped me get there." But with recognition came something deeper, responsibility. David felt the weight of the movement he had helped ignite, and he began asking himself a bigger question. Part 9. The Crossroads. Chapter 17. The Offer. It came in a sleek white envelope, hand-delivered to Fort Radley. David sat alone in his office when he opened it. Major David West, you are formally invited to serve as a Special Liaison Officer to the Department of the Army's Office of Diversity and Inclusion. This is a temporary Washington-based assignment with national impact. You would help oversee the rollout of the promotion reforms you inspired. The Army needs leaders who don't just wear rank, but embody it. Respectfully, Lieutenant General Evelyn Maddox. David reread it 3 times. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to shape real, long-term change across the Army. But it also meant stepping away from his unit, his people, the soldiers he trained, the young cadets who looked up to him. It meant leaving behind the boots-on-the-ground work for suits and policy meetings. He went home and laid the letter on the kitchen table. Alicia studied it. "It's your call," she said gently, "but wherever you lead from, office or battlefield, you're still a soldier." David nodded slowly. "Yeah, but I have to be sure I'm leading in the right direction." Chapter 18. In the Field Again. Before deciding, David requested something unusual: a week with his unit on a field operation in Colorado. No command post, no staff meetings, just boots, mud, drills, and fire missions. He needed to remember why he fought so hard in the first place. Out there, covered in dust, yelling over radios, moving with his team through forests and valleys, he felt alive, grounded, real. On the last night of the operation, as the unit sat around a small fire eating cold MREs, one of the new sergeants turned to him. "Sir," she said, "if you leave, I hope it's to make the Army better for the next 10 years. But selfishly, we'd really miss you." David smiled. "If I go, it's not to leave you behind. It's to clear the path ahead." Back at base, he stared at the letter once more, and this time he signed it. Part 10. Legacy in Motion. Chapter 19. Washington's Uniform. The Army car pulled up to the Pentagon as the sun rose behind the marble facade. Major David West stepped out in his dress uniform. Not a visitor this time, not a witness, not a petitioner. He was here as a leader. Inside, a new office awaited him, a modest corner suite under the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, with a nameplate that read, MAGI. David West, Strategic Policy Liaison. Stacks of folders lined his desk. Reform plans, policy briefs, internal resistance reports, but also letters from soldiers, junior officers, even cadets from West Point asking for mentorship or advice. The role was intense. Meetings ran long. Pushback was inevitable. Some brass didn't like the changes. Some tried to delay. Others questioned if the Army was moving too fast. But David never flinched. He sat in those meetings with quiet conviction, never angry, always focused. "Slow progress," he said once to a skeptical general, "isn't the same as responsible progress. Sometimes, slow is just an excuse to stay comfortable." And people listened. Over the next year, David helped develop a transparent promotion review model, launched a leadership training program for marginalized officers, and helped establish the first internal watchdog unit for officer advancement. Every time a new policy was approved, he marked it on the wall behind his desk with a silver pin. By year's end, there were 12 pins, 12 real changes. Chapter 20. The Hall of Honor. One spring morning, David received an invitation from the Army Historical Center. "You are to be recognized at the Military Hall of Honor exhibit for your contributions to ethics and equity in the U.S. Armed Forces." It was surreal. He stood that day beneath a glass ceiling, one that literally let sunlight pour into the newly renovated wing. On the wall behind him were photos of legendary generals, trailblazers, and decorated heroes. And now, his face was there too. A new exhibit titled Leadership Above Rank, The Legacy of Major David West. He turned to Alicia, holding her hand tightly. "They got it right," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "They finally got it right." In his speech, David said, "This isn't just about me. It's about every soldier who's been overlooked, every officer who's been silenced, and every young cadet who now believes their uniform is enough, no matter what they look like. Rank should be earned, not filtered. Leadership should be seen, not judged by background. And justice must be part of our code. I wore this uniform for over a decade. Today, I wear it knowing it means more than ever before. When he stepped down from the podium, a young black cadet approached him, nervous, beaming. "Major West, sir, you don't know me, but because of you, I stayed in ROTC. I almost quit. But then I read your story. I just wanted to say, thank you." David smiled warmly and shook his hand. "No," he said. "Thank you. You're the future now. Make it count." He looked up at the wall one last time, where the light touched the words beneath his name. He didn't just fight for rank. He fought for the soul of the uniform. And with that, David West walked into the future. Not as a symbol, not as a rebel, but as a major who changed the system by standing his ground.